Good morning. It's going to be a beautiful day in Atlanta today. A little bit on the chilly side right now, but we're told it's going to warm up beautifully today. Welcome to this webinar. This is part of the Crisis Coach webinar series presented by the Georgia Independent School Association as the host for these webinars. And today we're going to be discussing crisis or consequence management. Our presenter is the president of Firestorm, Jim Satterfield. We'd like to invite you to become our friend on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter. And on Twitter, we're known as Firestorm Soul. Firestorm is Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. There is a hashtag, and that hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We remind you the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and the work product provided must be read and considered in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, do not interpret this information as legal advice or legal opinion. We're delighted to have this series of Crisis Coach webinars underwritten by the Georgia Independent School Association. This is the beginning and the onset of the 2016 Crisis Coach webinar series. You can watch previous webinars from 2015, 2014 by going to firestorm.com. You can also register for future webinars or other events within Firestorm by going to firestorm.com.
And I don't think Jeff's with us today. I think he's out working with a couple of schools this morning. This is Jim Satterfield, everyone, and thanks for joining with us in our conversations today. There is an event coming up the first week of March, which is a Crisis Coach workshop for the Georgia Independent School Associations. It'd be a chance for you to bring your plan there, talk with us and other schools about it, and go through an exercise event. I know that we're all in mourning this morning because we didn't win the lottery last night. There's another $1.6 billion that I lost somewhere. So I appreciate the fact that you came in this morning, even with the regret of not winning the lottery, to talk about that. But I look forward to meeting with you that first week in March and at that workshop, and bring your plan, and we'll talk about them and what you need to do and share on that. I'll also mention now that there is an active shooter exercise scheduled for February 18th for schools. It'll be at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. It'll be a virtual exercise. You would join in with your crisis team around the table and go through an active shooter event. It is a 2-hour exercise. There is no cost associated with it, so that should fit most everybody's budget since they didn't get the $1.6 billion. But it's a chance to see how an event escalates and the types of decisions that you need to make at every step along the way. For those of you who have a friend that's in the association, make sure that the other schools here in Georgia are aware of that particular event. It's a unique opportunity. We did cyber breach last month. We had 890 organizations. We had half the Fortune 500 joining into that. So the active shooter event on the 18th for schools. There's going to be an active shooter event for businesses on the 8th. Again, that's a 2-hour event. Starts at 2 p.m. Eastern, and you can register on the Firestorm website. So as we start today, it's Jim Satterfield. Thank you for being with us again for this series. This is the third year. I think it's actually about 3.5 years. We started midway through the year before that. And to start to talk about your plans and what you needed to put into place within your organization. When we think about risk, and it is in a crisis, it is a turning point within an organization. Everything else becomes known about the organization based upon what occurred in that particular area. And so it's going to be important to start to think about, can we identify or be able to predict these events before, in fact, that they occur? in creating this concept of an intelligence network within our school, how would that make a difference and that we could plan differently? We did a survey of schools earlier last year, looked at, are you using external intelligence to identify potential threats? And you'll see less than a third are. So there's an opportunity there to enhance your program. Wouldn't you want to know before that gun comes to school? And the answer is, yeah, I would like to know that. And so today we're going to focus on how you look at all of the hazards that you've identified and establish a program to see if you're at a point where they're starting to occur and an issue that you should be concerned about. This is an interesting point for most of us because in the planning that's historically done, you've done a vulnerability threat assessment and it kind of sits over to the side. What we now want to be able to do is to take that threat assessment and make it more actionable, giving you the ability to say, we're at a point now where we need to activate portions of our plans to respond before these other things have started to occur. We're in an environment where disaster denial is prevalent, but today everything is foreseeable, and tomorrow anyone may be found accountable. So if there was something tragic that happened at your school and there'd be litigation later, and even worse, you've got to pick up the phone and call a parent and say your child's not coming home from school today, the accountability factor will come back to say, well, what did you know and when did you know it? What did you do? And why didn't you act sooner to prevent this from occurring? So liability has been established in many of these areas. There was a terrorist event in the late 90s that occurred, and there was criminal trial for the terrorists, but there was also a civil trial, and in that trial the jury awarded damages as follows: 2/3 of the liability to the building owner, 1/3 of the liability to the terrorist. So if something happens at our school, the liability is going to come back directly to the school, and it will become a part of who you are in defining your school in ways that you were not looking to do. So when we think about these things, there are three big buckets. There's what you know, there's what you know you don't know, but that bigger bucket that's out there is what you don't know you don't know. And so today, as we focus in on this concept of intelligence and starting to try to figure out how do we start addressing all of these things that we don't even know about yet, how do we identify them, how do we quantify them, how do we put them into our plan, that's where our conversation is going to go today and what we're going to look at. Now, as we think about that, you've heard us talk about predict, plan, perform. That's where we're identifying and predict the vulnerabilities and threats, what are their impacts, what are the warning signs, and what are the triggers to action, and how we're going to monitor for those events. So we're going to really be focusing today on that predict step in that methodology. And we want to know before now. We don't want to wait until the gun comes to school or the sexual assault occurs or where any of those events are starting to happen. We want to know beforehand so that we can prevent and mitigate anything that could happen associated with it. So if we're going to do that, where do we start? You know, that sounds great in theory, but how do we put it into practice? Well, I recommend that you get your crisis team around the table and sit down and talk about what are all the hazards that we face. Sitting here in Georgia, we know that we could have severe weather. That could be tornadoes. It could be winter storms. A few years ago, we saw the disruption that those had in schools in the state of Georgia. It could be communicable illness. If you're depending upon the location of your school, there could be a flooding exposure. We certainly have violence types of things. Listing every one of those and talking about them. Now, each year you should be updating your vulnerability threat assessment, and once every 3 years, the standards and best practices are you kind of go back to ground zero and rebuild that completely to understand. But if you start to divide that in your mind of here are our hazards, here are our vulnerabilities, here are the risks, and some of our risks are business crisis risk. We have responded to schools who had some financial issues that were there, one of which there was fraud, where money that was spent in a way that was not approved and understood. So it's not just the violence. It's not just the natural disaster. It's a variety of things that could happen in each of those areas. Now, once you have started listing them, then we want you to begin to think, well, what's a warning sign that could be occurring? And we're going to go into much more detail around the warning signs and indicators and triggers in our conversation today, and give you a tool to maybe help organize that as we talk. Now, I also want you to think about not only are you doing those identifications of the hazards and risks and vulnerabilities and thinking about warning signs and indicators and triggers to get our plans done, but start to break that down into guarded, elevated, and severe. Now, you've heard us talk about those three words before, but we think about them in terms of communicable illness and the reports that are coming out. Are we at a guarded level, or is it elevated up, or is it a severe? We also use that in talking about behaviors of concern, but you can use this across any particular area to make sure that you have thought those things through. So start out by beginning to focus on what are the hazards, the vulnerabilities, and risks that you see that your school faces. Now, as we think about disasters and crises, there are 5 common failures that happen across all businesses and schools. Failure to control critical supply chains, failure to train employees for work and at home. Interestingly, 70% of employees don't know what to do in a disaster or crisis. Well, that's a training opportunity, and educators should be very good at doing that training. By the way, 95% of them don't have a plan at home, and having a plan at home is a building block for a plan at work. The third most common failure is the failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. That's really where we're focusing. That's why the big red arrow is sitting there today, because we're going to be taking that word monitor and converting it into a plan for you to be able to know that the thing that you identified as a threat or a risk is now starting to occur. Because the earlier we can get you that knowledge, the better it's going to be in terms of outcome for your school. Then conducting exercises and updating your plans. You've got to test your plans. You have to see that they're occurring, and that active shooter exercise next month will give you an opportunity to do that with your crisis management team. And then finally, develop a crisis communications plan with message maps. What are you going to say at each step along the way, and how those elements are coming together. Now, those 5 common failures are solved by following the predict, plan, perform methodology that we talked about, and identify and involve the suppliers, the functions, the employees, conducting the exercise, and then establish how you're going to monitor that intelligence program that you're going to create. And we're really going to zero in on that intelligence today in our conversation. So how do you predict? There's a lot of risk behind our young people, and you see words out there like active shooter and suicide and child pornography and natural disasters and communicable illness. By the way, almost everything you see listed there, we responded to a school somewhere in the United States this past year. We had video cameras being put in restrooms. We had heads of school with sexual harassment. We had child pornography on computers. We had attacks and violence and bullying, sexual abuse. Many of these elements are out there. Well, how do you predict when they're going to happen? How do you start to know? And the answer to that is you must build an intelligence network. And it's not going to happen with the snap of your fingers. It's going to happen by looking at and starting to focus in on how we're going to predict that that's about to occur. We started with looking at what are the hazards and the risks and the vulnerabilities. Now we're moving in and saying, how do we build an intelligence network under that? Now, many of you have comprehensive plans that you're very proud of, that you've done a good job of working through. Most all of you have not built an intelligence network. That's the next step in the evolution of having your plans aligned to standards and best practices. So can you really predict a crisis? And the answer is, yep, you can. But you've got to focus on looking at what the warning signs are. Now, many times after a crisis, we find that the warning signs were ignored. And so for you to be able to say, if this is a risk that we've got, here's a warning sign that we could, if we see this, we know the risk is likely to occur, or it's elevated, or it's even at a severe high likelihood of occurring. And then we take and we then break that down a little bit further to talk about indicators. So the value here is identifying these indicators that are going to be present and recognizable before the crisis occurs. And we want to see this crisis before it happens there. If you knew that there was about to be sexual abuse on your school, you would do something before it happened. If you knew that bullying was going to occur, you'd intervene before it happened. If you knew that someone was thinking about bringing a gun to school tomorrow, you'd want to intervene before the gun walks through the front door at your school. And that's where we're focused today. It's talking about understanding those and putting them in place. I'm going to quickly just go back to what we talked about in some other areas with this predictive diagnostic model, and we'll expand that in other scenarios. But that left-hand quadrant that's a historical risk that you've seen within an organization. The tornado, the winter storm, the more traditional areas that we're prepared for, even the workplace violence event. But the difficult, the chronic, and the severe, and the other quadrants are processes in place where they're not good metrics. There's not a clear understanding, and it starts to escalate in detecting that problem. The changes in your school didn't happen overnight. They happened over a period of time. And so the earlier you identify that, the higher the likelihood that it could be prevented or mitigated. But if we wait until it becomes a severe business crisis, it's complex, there's extreme urgency, that the accreditation people are involved, that the parents are in arms about it, now we've got a severe problem within our school. So our goal is to try to arrive earlier. So I'm going to give you a formula, and I want you to think about this. Information plus insight is equal to intelligence. Now, there's a ton of information out there, but we've got to start to plan on how do we focus that information into some intelligence that's actionable, that I can do something and do it before now. That's the key element associated with it. Because if it's sitting out there, it's what you bring to the table, your insight in looking at that and going, wait a minute, something's not right here. We need to find out more about it. And that insight added to the information then gives you the intelligence that you're looking for. And so today is a beginning to try to build that knowledge level for you to be able to do it. So we're always going to be thinking about urgency, and that's a function of, is it a crisis? Clearly, if someone said, this is happening right now, you don't have any choice. You're going to be dealing with it immediately at that instant. If there's a compliance aspect of, wait a minute, we have reason to believe that this is happening to a student, so we have to now report this to the authorities. If there's a fear of loss, if there's a brand and reputation element, is this something that our school could be defined by in looking at this? Is there a cost savings? Can we save money by doing this? Is there an opportunity for revenue in building into it? The business crisis area is generally around some way that we're structured, some breakdown in the operational areas or the functional processes within our schools, and it's going to result in impacts on our people, our students, our profitability, our brand, and our reputation. That's why we're concerned about it. So our goal here is to identify these impending risks before they occur. Now, all of your plans are great. It's great to have a plan that says when this happens, we're going to do that. But we're trying to get you before those things occur, to get you to recognize it and intervene before the escalation has happened. That's got to be the goal that we're all working on together. So you're going to need information and intelligence at every step through this process. And your plan should be structured around 5 stages: pre-action, before anything occurs; onset; impact assessment; crisis response and recovery; and post. Now, the pre-action is what you're doing today. You're attending a webinar and learning about a particular area. It's the writing of your plans. It's doing that hazard impact matrix that I talked about, or the vulnerability threat assessment. It's getting the emergency supplies and materials available, doing the exercises and the test. So that's where we need to have intelligence to know how far along are we. Do our people understand what they're to do? That's where we're focused with our intelligence at that point. Now the event occurs. How do we know that it happened? What's the indicators that tell us that? How do we get that report? And then remember, at onset, we're going to be focused on life and safety. Now, in a school environment, we can shelter in place, we can lock down, we can lock out, or we can evacuate. And so those are going to be the actions that we're taking there, maybe first aid and administration at that point. We'd activate our emergency response plan, and immediately we begin to do an impact assessment. Was someone hurt? How badly were they hurt? Were multiple people hurt? Did we have someone die associated with it? Depending upon the severity, we declare a crisis, activate our crisis management plan, and how we communicate with our parents and our students, then start to say how do we recover and get back to business as usual and our restoring operations at the school. And then finally the post-recovery period where we're talking about what are the lessons learned, what could we have done better and improve. At every stage along the way, there's information that we need. There's intelligence that says this is about to happen. This is where we are. Here's the types of actions that we need to take place. So assuming that you've sat down and done your vulnerability analysis and started listing them, the activities, and you can take that right off your hazard matrix and put it in, I want you to focus on the impact and the certainty that something's going to happen. Now those items that are low to medium impact, that's normal operations. You run the school for a long time. You've seen teachers be absent. You've seen some things that are occurring. That's normal. You've got a plan to deal with those. That's not what we're focused on as we look in this area. We're looking at those things that potentially have a high impact. Now if it's high impact and high certainty, you're in that danger quadrant where we certainly need to have intelligence about anything that has the potential to go into that high impact and high certainty area. We can't afford not to. That's why you do fire drills. You're anticipating that we could have a fire. We need to make sure that everybody understands this clearly, and we've got different detectors to understand it and indicators that these situations are starting to occur. But even if it's in that low to medium certainty, we need to have contingency plans to begin to address that. So I'm going to introduce a couple of new concepts now and then give you a tool that I think you will find helpful in doing this. I want to talk about this concept of a risk derivative. So when we talk about this, how do we know that something's going on? Well, we have to, in many cases, we can't directly get the report. Now, we can't report to know that there's a tornado in our school. That's an easy way to do the monitoring, and with the alerts, you would immediately have that. Attendance indicator. If you're having an attendance issue, that could be an indicator of a communicable illness, an indication that there's something that's going on, and the students are they're grading issues, they're having behavioral issues in the classroom, that there's conflicts associated with it. Well, those all become indicators that there's some. If someone is having an issue, they generally talk about it, and today our young people talk about it on social media. And so understanding what's going on within your school community will key indicate that there may be a problem that you need to address. Maybe it's domestic violence in the home. Another key component associated with that you're going to plan. Okay, I'm sorry, I've apparently dropped off, so I'll go to my cell. I apologize. Let me do that right now, everyone. I'm coming right now, guys.
To enable audio control, please enter audio. Is not valid, not valid, not valid, not valid.
Bill, can you hear me now? Okay, good. I couldn't tell if it had gone through correctly or not. So, yeah, I apologize, everyone. We had a problem, and I had to switch over to my cell phone to be able to continue. So what I was indicating here with the risk derivatives, and I apologize for the interruption on the communications level here. By the way, it's good to have a backup plan. That's why the cell phones come into play. if people are talking about these events on social media, and that could be the indicator that you're going to need. So you would take the chart that's down below, you'd write the risk and the threats that you've already identified in your vulnerability analysis, your hazard matrix there. Then for each one, what's a warning sign that could occur? And you might have multiple warning signs. And then within that warning sign, what's the indicator that you need to take action associated with it? And then the tools or medium that you're using in that area, and then the actual trigger that says we now need to take that next step and moving forward. And then viewing it at a guarded level, that's at the lowest level that we're there. We're going to always be on guard and aware. That's what you've told the parents in your school. That's where you're focused. Then seeing that it's moved to an elevated format associated with it, or ultimately a severe. Now you see the grid in the upper right-hand quadrant of the slide, and that blue line across is kind of a base level associated with it. And at this point, this is where we want to see, is the risk kind of below that? Is it above it? Is there a trend line? And the rose-colored curve that's showing there is an indicator. And so for every one of the risks, there's a kind of a rising and falling cycle that's associated with it. The length of that and the slope of those lines are determined by the risk and the exposures that are there. So if you look at them as they start to occur, the one that's down at a low level, we're still at a guarded level, nothing is going on. But wait a minute, we're starting to hear some things on social media. We're starting to see some things begin to occur. How do we carry that forward? How do we know that that's happening? And it moves to an elevated. And then finally, it's at a point where it's targeted at a particular time in an event where it's a severe level. So I want you to start to think about the risk and the hazards that you have, identifying, completing that chart down below so that you have specific actions that you take at a guarded level, at an elevated risk level, and then finally at a severe level. So I'm going to give you some different tools to think about as a way to try to get on a single page what you need to do at each particular estimate of time associated with this event and severity. Now, this is a standard response protocol awareness table. It takes the standard response of evacuate, lockdown, lockout, shelter in place and said, here's what it is, here's what the condition that would cause, here's the directive that we're going to send out, and here's the action that we want to have take place associated with it. This simple chart would be enough to let a school know what they need to do if you have identified that the condition for action is in fact present. It's a different way to start to organize your thoughts and communications. I'm going to show you some additional tools around it because our goal here is to try to take what's that binder on the shelf with your plan and getting it down to the simplest possible level that it could be utilized on a single page. Now, here are two charts. The one is out of a business and the other is out of a church. The one on the left talks about an event activation matrix where they've divided within their structure a minor event, an incident, or a business crisis, and it shows that they need, at a normal minor event, they're just going to let their people deal with it. If it's a category 1, which they're talking about an incident, then they've been concerned in their organization about data security, facility, human, operations, power, social media, and workplace violence. And you start to see the activation notification requirements in those next areas. And they had a further requirement that they wanted to get their executive leadership involved. And so sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. But here's the descriptor of showing when it wouldn't. So at their facility, if they had a damage to the facility, they wouldn't necessarily notify unless it was going to mean it was serious damage and they couldn't use the location. Finally, in the category 2, the business crisis risk, you see immediately they want their executive leadership team involved in carrying that and getting that information out. To the right is a similar approach, but designed for a church during their Sunday morning worship service. And here they're concerned about imminent weather events, imminent violence outside of the church, imminent violence inside the church building, but not necessarily in the sanctuary, imminent physical threat, building collapse, fire, bomb, etc., medical emergency, and imminent violence in the sanctuary. And so they describe the actions, and you see some of those listings very similar to the standard protocol, the message that would be given out, what you would expect the ushers in the church to be doing, and what the crisis management team would in fact be doing. So as you look at that, organizing your thoughts and getting it together in a single page is a key tool to help better understand and respond in how you're looking. Here's one more sample, and it's a different format, but it could be adapted for your school. This one is around a cyber breach activation matrix, and this organization looked at information assets and technology, brand and reputation, and user. That was their particular levels. They had the same 3-level approach where they had normal operations, moderate potential, and high probability of a breach. So you could have a normal potential, you could have guarded, elevated, and severe following across that. But you'll see there's descriptors listed in there to help the person who has this chart, this matrix in their hand, to understand better what to do and, more importantly, when to do it in bringing those elements in place. So if we're going to pull all of this together, we refer to this as listen and look. And you want to know before this abuse occurs, before the violence happens, or whatever the current concern or exposure you have on your hazard impact matrix, and that might be. So we start out with listening. That's generally the more open type of an area. We look at streams and phrases and words, and it's a general situational awareness environment. And what do you hear that's going on in your school, both in the classrooms and from your students and your teachers? But we can also look on social media. People have concerns, they talk about it there, and it's a chance to be seen. We set up a geofence around a warehouse for a Fortune 10 company, and we're identifying an employee that was concerned with his supervisor, that there was racial undertones associated with it. And as the conversation continued to escalate, he made a statement, the only way to resolve this is with a gun, and I'm bringing a gun to work tomorrow. Well, clearly that company would want to know that. We're working right now with a franchisor who has 800 restaurants across the country, and setting up a geofence around the neighborhood where their restaurants are located to know if there's anything within a mile radius being talked about. And so with the civil unrest that we're seeing, whether it's homegrown terrorism or if it's protest in March, the Black Lives Matter, or other drug deals in an area, any particular thing that comes within that 1 mile radius of their location, they want to know about it so they can protect their people. Well, if something was about to happen within a mile radius of your school, would you want to know? And that becomes an opportunity for you to be prepared. So the first thing you do is you listen. And we're listening on social media, we're listening in our schools, the anonymous reporting, all of those elements come together. Then we're going to start to look. Looking is when we then focus on a particular event or a particular person of interest. Is this something that an allegation is coming out about a student or about a teacher? Is there a particular area? So we then would go and look specifically that, and it's very targeted. Again, all of this information is out in the public domain if you're using the tools and looking. So we're trying to take the information, add your insight, what you know, to create intelligence that's actionable for your school within your plans. Let me just step you through a couple of quick things that we've seen, and maybe this will help clarify this a little bit. So if you saw this, I'm going to kill someone at work today, or it could have said school. This is a posting from last August that we uncovered. So we were warning and listening, and we suddenly saw this. So then the question says, we've got to look at this closer. Is somebody frustrated? Is this real? Are there other messages that would support it? How are we going to focus on this to go, I have to go to work in the morning, makes me want to kill myself? And if you had a student saying that, wouldn't you want to know about that same thing? But then you need to put in some triggers, and then you have a way to assign this threat to a particular person and have a process to follow up. If we're going to create an intelligence network, if we're going to have those triggers set up, there needs to be an activation plan to follow up on each one of those so that we don't miss that. So if we don't have a program to do that, we need to map out who's going to get that information and how they're going to focus Even anonymous reporting is an indicator tool that could be used here. So if there's a well-routed escalation flow, you've assigned it to someone, and then you want to report back on what did they find out. Is this real? Was it just puffing? Was it somebody who was really associated with this? Or is there an action that needs to be taken about this particular accusation at this point in time? Because when minutes matter, seconds count. So we're creating this intelligence network to get you the information as early in the thought process as we possibly can, so that you're prepared to be able to implement the plans that you've worked so hard to do. Because there's certain protocols and standards that you're going to follow associated with that. So it gets to be quite confusing. There's a lot of things that are out there. But we want to now sit down and talk about, once we've got a warning, what do we do? And if you look at your plans, you go through your hazard analysis, you go through your vulnerability analysis, you've identified the warning signs, you've identified the triggers and the indicators that are there. You even structured it into guarded, elevated, and severe. Now, what are you going to do? Do you know? Do your employees, do your teachers know? Are we ready to carry that forward? Is this something that we involve security with? What do we do in each of these areas? And have we run a test? Have we put our team together and said, okay, we're seeing this, tell me what it is that you're going to specifically do at that point in time? We live in times now where the behavior of our students, the behavior of our faculty, and the threats that are out there are increasing. And so there are opportunities now for us to identify them beforehand. So look at this thought process and see. This IT manager saw something, turned it over to investigators, led to terrorism charge. And you see there, after I shoot all these idiots, and this was at a college threat, what was coming out? All of this information was out in the public domain and could have been known at that point in time. Now, we would much rather see an intervention before the attack starts, before the active shooter is at your school. That's every parent's fear, is that there's going to be an active shooter at the school. And clearly no one wants to be in a position to have to call a parent and say, I'm sorry, your child's not coming home from school today. That's where we're focused in each one of our plans and areas, and all the work that you've done in terms of building that within your school is extremely important. So if we think about this a little bit more, what do you need to do? Do you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow? Can you afford not to know? So stopping now to think about, how do you create this intelligence network based upon all the plans and great work that you've put into place to this point in time. This is the next step, because our goal is to get you this information as early as you can, so that what you have your teachers and your staff respond to mitigates or even prevents the event from ever occurring. Now, if you're concerned about workplace violence and active shooter, we've got the exercise that's coming up on February the 18th. That's at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's a 2-hour active shooter exercise. And we'll be starting it out with the warning signs and pre-event issues, dealing through the event, and then dealing with the consequence management thereafter. So get your team, put them around a table in one of your classrooms or a conference room, and it's a chance for you to go through a case study test exercise to see what it's like to make decisions at each one of these steps along the way, and where are the opportunities to improve what you currently have. It will be a 2-hour event, so where this webinar today is 45 minutes, this time for the exercise you want to allot 2 hours. We anticipate we'll have 1,000 schools in this exercise. You want to make sure your plans align to standards and best practices. We're certainly glad to work with you in that area. In fact, there's a free assessment that's available to you through your membership in the Georgia Independent School Association. I would challenge you to start designing your intelligence network now. Even if you do one thing, and then you add another, and then another, and another, because this is a continuous improvement process for you to get those tools in place and make sure that you have a person assigned and are monitoring for the activities. Also, you might want to think about, over the next few years, getting your plans onto the smartphones. No one's more than 2 or 3 feet away from their smartphone at any given time, so it becomes an instant access tool. Everyone could have the plan in their hand, more detailed plans for your crisis team or your individual departments could be segmented and delivered directly to them. But it's a way to make sure everybody has the information they need, because in one of these events there won't be time to go find a binder on a shelf, open it up to a page and see, and schedule the training. Again, coming up in the first week of March, there is a crisis coach workshop. I would encourage you to bring your plans. That will give us a chance to talk about them specifically and get your questions answered. So there's a lot to do, and there's time now to get this done and tools that are available. If you'd like a brief from today's exercise, you can go to the Firestorm website, and you'd be able to have an opportunity to download that brief. Again, it's available at no cost. You can also go there and access a recording for today's webinar and even have others in your school view it, all at no cost. Our thanks go out to the Georgia Association, Independent School Association, and all the good work that GISA is doing and continues to do. And we're very proud that in our 10th year that we are making this program even broader to help in those areas. So you can go to firestorm.com to activate viewing this video from today's training, or to watch previous ones, or to download the brief. If you've got a question, you can build a contact form out there and we'll be back in touch, or you can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com and we'll reach directly back out to you. I'm going to ask Chad White, who's a Firestorm principal, to reach out to you directly to see if you've got questions. But if you need assistance, pick up the phone and call us at 800-321-2219, and we're available to help and to answer and to talk about what you need to do. We've seen a lot of conversations over the last several years, and we've spoken with many of you. Fortunately, we spoke to most of you when you weren't in a crisis. We every year have 2 or 3 members of the GISA who've experienced a crisis where there's been something that's occurred to a student or a threat that's been made about a particular area, and to understand what needs to be done. We would like to help you. We would much prefer to work with you before there's a disaster or a crisis that's occurred, but if you find yourself in that position, we'll certainly be glad to get on the phone and give you some initial support. That initial consultation, because of your membership in the GISA, comes to you at no cost. So there's a lot to see and a lot to do. I would encourage you to register for that exercise on the 18th with your team. I think that'll be a good chance to see how your plans work in an active shooter environment. Thank you for all that you're doing every day to make our young people safer, for the education that you provide, the support that you help them with their ethics and moral growth, their athletic growth, and their growth as a person. I think there's a great many challenges in front of our young people today, and you play a very critical role. Thank you again for your service and what you do in each of those areas. So until next month, I wish you goodbye, and condolences for not winning the lottery last night. I wish you had. Look forward to talking with you again in the future soon. I apologize for the technical glitch earlier about the sound, but I'm glad that I was able to come back and we could finish today. We'll reach out to each one of you in the coming week. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.